Failure. Failure is human, universal, and inevitable. So write our archbishops in their introduction to the Church of England Lent reflections for this year, Dust and Glory. Failure is human, universal, and inevitable. And you might think, well, that's a bit pessimistic, but let's do a little experiment, shall we? Hands up, anyone here who has never failed. There you go. And let's think about where we are as a world at the beginning of Lent 2023, just days after the first anniversary of the so-called military operation in Ukraine. I don't know whether you caught on the BBC news feed this week 10 very moving photos that were taken in Ukraine the day before the invasion started. It's still on the BBC news feed if you want to go and have a look. Very, very moving photos. A selfie on a countryside walk. A cat stretched out beside a home worker. A preschool child proudly showing off a candle that she'd made at nursery. Dinner and drinks with friends. A beautiful panorama taken from the top of a church tower. A dog and a baby sharing a living room rug. A football match. A cup of coffee before a driving lesson. A grown man fooling around with a Christmas reindeer. Children's games at an art gallery. Just normal people doing very normal things, all to be horribly disrupted by war. As just one of the contributors writes of these photos, I felt pure happiness in these days. I was happy with my friends and my work. But there was also something in the air, a sense that something inevitable was coming and that everything would change. What is war but failure? Failure to resolve tensions, failure to resolve conflict in productive ways. In the case of Ukraine and Russia, these tensions and this conflict have been building for years. And failure to resolve them constructively on the part of Ukraine, on the part of Russia, and yes, on the part of the wider Western world, has led to the situation we now find ourselves in. Failure is human, universal, inevitable. And this is borne out not just in our experience today, it's borne out in the first few pages of the Bible. The story of Adam and Eve is a story of failure. It's a story of failure, human, universal, inevitable. There's an air of inevitability about it. As soon as Adam and Eve grace the planet, there's just that feeling that they're going to mess up. You can enjoy the fruit of all the trees in the garden, says God, except that one in the middle. Forbidden fruit. It's rather topical, isn't it? I don't know what you're giving up for Lent, but we're going through a bit of a collective fast, aren't we, of fruit and veg of all varieties. There was that wonderful headline during the week regarding the lady who tried to sneak out of Lidl with 180 cucumbers, and she was stopped at the door. And the headline, Caesar salad. Fantastic. Forbidden fruit. You could enjoy the fruit of all the trees in the garden, except just that one in the middle. It feels like a test of humanity's trust in God and obedience to God. And it's a test which the first human beings failed. Epic fail, as our younger people might say. But any of us humans today, we would have failed the same test. And in fact, we do fail the same test. You see, there's something within all of us, isn't there, that isn't content even with paradise. We always seem to want that little bit more. We always want to push the envelope. We always want to have that little bit more control over our lives. Maybe that's why the forbidden tree is called the tree of knowledge, because there's always that voice within us telling us that true life is not about trusting our Creator, but rather living by our own wits and our own intellects. Now, it's not clear what the tree of knowledge of good and evil actually is in this story, or what it represents. There's all kinds of theories. It's not clear either what its fruit is. No apple mentioned anywhere. Nor is the connection between the tree and the snake explained, though there may be an ancient memory here of our ancestors' number one predator, which probably was the snake. But one thing is clear. By failing God's test of trust and obedience, human beings in this story, they somehow realize for the first time that they are vulnerable. That nakedness thing, it's not about sexuality. It's not about sex, it's about vulnerability. They suddenly realize they're vulnerable. They suddenly realize they can be hurt and they can hurt. And human anxiety and fear and guilt and, oh yes, blame. It wasn't me, it was the woman. It wasn't me, it was the snake. All these things creep into God's good world forever. And it doesn't take long, a few verses later, in fact, in chapter 4, that human violence has crept into God's good world forever. This is also why we have just marked the first anniversary of a terrible war. Because what this powerful story in Genesis reminds us is that human failure to trust in God's goodness and provision leads to fear. Fear leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to guilt. Guilt leads to blame, and blame leads eventually to violence. This is the sad but inevitable truth played out in every human life, played out throughout human history, over and over again, this endless cycle of spiritual failure, fear, anxiety, guilt, blame, violence. Yes, paradise has indeed been lost forever. Or has it? Because thank God the story doesn't end there. The story of Jesus in the wilderness is the story of the one human being who doesn't listen to the voice of the snake. The one human being who maintains his faith and does not give in to fear. The one human being who does not fail God's test. The one human being who, given the choice between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge, chooses the tree of life every time, even when that tree takes the form of the tree of death, the cross of Calvary. But more about that next week. This is the good news of Jesus, though we so often fail the Creator's test and will continue to do so. There is one human being who did not. Jesus, Son of Man, Son of God. And because he passed the test, all of us, by following him, can set out on that long but sure journey back to paradise. a journey from dust to glory. Amen.